Hello and welcome back to the Karuna podcast. I'm Ryan Little, the manager of the Karuna Coffee House, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, George Dowdell.
Hello.
George was the founder of what was then called King's Care and is now called Karuna Action. George, thank you so much for being with us today.
Okay.
So can you take us back to the very beginning? What were you doing before you started King's Care and what inspired you to start the charity?
Since I was about 20, I worked with the computers all my life. I've worked with the computers. I've ended up as a software development manager with a small company and head of software development. But the story for me in terms of King's Care started 10 years before I left the company when I read a book called Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger, which really challenged me. I remember putting the book down, having read the last page, saying, this book is going to change my life. Because it gave me a great burden of poverty around the world, what we could do about it as Christians, how we could make it easier. But I'm not a doctor, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a teacher. I thought, what can I do? Well, eventually we sold the company off. I was a minor shareholder of the company and received some money for that. It was enough for me to take up to 2 years off work, working voluntarily. And out of that, King's Care was formed.
And what were you hoping to achieve by starting the charity? What was your goal?
Well, basically to relieve extreme poverty around the world. I mean, we could do a whole thing, it cost billions of pounds, but doing something towards it. So really it was a question of raising money and relieving basic needs where we could.
And how difficult was the process of starting the charity?
Well, not really too difficult because I found actually quite amazing that although I thought I'm not a doctor or an engineer or something like that, I'd some sort of training built in. I remember going to a site in Sri Lanka and a church meeting where we were discussing how we could help. And I would ask a question in English. They would be translated into Sinhala and talk amongst themselves and then come back with the comment. And then I would ask another question, and I realised in amazement, this is what I've been doing for actually the last 10 years. As a computer engineer, software development, we go into a company, have a meeting of the managers to discuss what the project should do. And I would ask a question, they would argue amongst themselves, come up with an answer, I'd ask more. So I realised I actually had some training to do the work of the charity without realising I've been trained in a way for it. It's basically a question of problem solving, and and also before I joined before I was in the computer industry, I worked for 2 years in a bank. That gave me a basic knowledge of accounting. But then as a company, we designed systems for accountants. So although I'm not an accountant, I understood accounting quite well.
Yeah.
And that also was very useful. I had to learn about fund accounting because charity accounting is quite different from company accounting. But that came along as it started.
And what were some of the challenges that you faced early on?
Well, I spent quite a lot of time visiting other churches and groups around the country, which for me was quite a challenge because I'm not an eloquent speaker. I'm not a preacher. And I was invited to churches to talk about the work of King's Care in the place of a normal sermon. So suddenly I was confronted with quite a challenge, and that was a challenge to me particularly. Also obtaining grants, because grants for overseas projects are extremely difficult to get. We applied for funding for the lottery fund, for instance, for a mobile clinic in Sri Lanka, and we filled in all the documents and grant application, and we didn't get it because basically they only had about 20 million to give away that year on overseas work. And they list all the projects in order of their priorities, not my priorities, but their priorities, and draw the line where 20 million stopped. And they wouldn't tell us whether we just missed or we're right at the bottom. So who knows? But we decided we're going to do it anyhow. And we did. We created this mobile clinic, not quite on a grand scale as we could have done if we got the lottery grant, but nevertheless it worked.
And what would you say were some of the most rewarding parts of your time with the charity?
I think what I loved particularly was visiting overseas projects. I really found that rewarding. I love it. I used to love travel. Travel now is quite a bar, and airports are almost a no-go for me, but I used to love them. I used to love airports and flying the cheapest way possible to Sri Lanka. I flew an Aeroflot to Sri Lanka once via Moscow because it was cheaper, and then I found that really challenging. Basically, the other thing I found rewarding was basically solving problems. It wasn't up to me what the projects were doing. They were according to the local situation, but I nevertheless had to solve problems, and that was particularly rewarding, I think. Yeah.
And what was it like handing the leadership of the charity over to Simon and Jessica?
Well, 21 years ago, I had a stroke, and it affected me physically, my leg and hands, and my speaking as well, which is obvious. But it didn't. Fortunately, it didn't affect my mind. At least I don't think it did. So I was able to carry on the work. But if it'd been in hospital, where I was in hospital for 6 weeks, I met some other people who were basically having a stroke had written them off completely from normal life. And if my stroke had been worse, I couldn't have carried on with King's Care. At that time, there was nobody to take it over. It would have collapsed. It would have just stopped. And I thought, well, I don't want King's Care or Karuna, as it's called now, to die with me. I wanted to continue. And so I started the search of somebody to take over. I realised that it's not very easy, because when you're thoroughly involved with something, you want to do everything. It's a question of control, really. You want to control everything, and it was quite hard to hand it over. I could see other situations, church situations, for instance, where the leaders can't hand it over to younger men coming, or women carrying as it goes on, and things can dissipate over the years as they get older, which is a shame. So I was determined to find somebody to take over.
And I think you did a good job.
Yes, I did a good job. Well, I met Jess first, and then Simon, and I remember him coming up to me on the first Sunday of a year, January, coming up to me and saying, "I'm going to work for you this year," which was, at the time, seemed impossible. We didn't have finances. We weren't big enough to do that. But instantly, I sort of knew it was right. It's one of those things I put down to hearing something from God, not directly in words, but knowing my head that this was right. So I said to Simon, I think something like, "Well, I don't know how, but yes." And it was only later that year he did join us, and that's been really good. When I was in Sri Lanka once with having a conference with people from various groups, somebody likened it to a relay race, where you hand over the baton to somebody else. But the trouble is with the relay race is you only hold on to the baton for a few seconds. you can't pass on everything in a few seconds. So I said, well, we've changed the rules of a relay race. I'll hand over and we run a lap together, and then we release baton and they run on their own. And I think that's what happened. So I worked with Simon and Jess for a while before I retired, and handed over gradually, and I think that was a success.
Now, speaking of success, working in the charity sector, success isn't driven by numbers and profit like it is for corporations. So how would you measure success for Karuna?
In terms of lives changed, I mean, that is difficult to measure. You can measure finances quite easily, the numbers. You can measure some things. Changing lives is something you can't easily measure, but I think that's the main thing which drives a charity like King's Care or Karuna Action. So whether it's a young person taught a skill as a barrister, for instance, or a young person who couldn't afford school, being educated, eventually perhaps even going to university in another country, that changes their lives. So I think that's what drives the work of King's Care and now Karuna Action, changing lives.
And how do you feel about the position that Karuna is in today?
I'm quite excited by it, really. It's very different from when I left it. There's now emphasis on UK community work in Aldershot area, and that wasn't there when I left. Well, it started to be when I left, but historically it wasn't. So the emphasis on local community in Aldershot is quite challenging. It's quite, I think I'm quite excited about it. It's harder to get finance for that. People don't want to give to a coffee shop. They want to come and drink coffee, perhaps, but so whereas in the past most of our giving has come from individuals, I understand that Simon and Jess are looking into grants to cover that, and that's great. I'm excited about that. I was worried about the last trustees meeting and look at the finances and think how we're going to continue. But if these grants are available, it'll solve that.
And what would you hope to see Karuna do in the future?
Well, probably the same again. I think when I started King's Care, the situation around the world was much worse than it is today. People say things are getting worse. They're not. They're getting better. There's a smaller percentage of the world in extreme poverty than there were 40 years ago. And so the need for overseas work is still there. It's still great, but it's not as great as it was. So I think the King's Karuna needs to get involved with the local community as well as the overseas side. I hope that side doesn't die out, but it will probably diminish a little bit in time, as it has already diminished a little bit in time. So I think it'd be good to see them being involved in the community in Aldershot and basically sharing that information with other charities. There must be groups all around the country, churches which want to get involved with the community, who are really doing it. I don't know how to do it. I'm sure that Karuna can actually point them in the right direction. I think that happened originally regarding the overseas work. Lots of other churches were trying to help people overseas, but didn't in an inexpert way. They didn't have the professional knowledge to know how to do it. And we obtained a number of projects because other churches handed them over to us to finance and to handle administratively. I think Karuna can actually do the same again with their knowledge of the local community and working in it. I think that is one of the futures for Karuna.
Now, if you could go back to day one when you first started King's Care, what advice would you give to yourself?
I had a lot of thinking about this. What would I say? Well, I think I would say to myself, never forget, it's all about people. It's not about money, charity rules, dealing with banks, dealing with the charity commission, dealing with auditors, and all these things that have to be done. But it's about people, whether it's people in Aldershot area or people overseas in Sri Lanka or other countries. It's about helping them. And yeah, it's all about people. It sounds very simple, but actually it's fundamental.
Really good advice. George, thank you so much for joining me today.
Okay.
And thank you everyone for listening. Have a great rest of your day and see you again soon.